This podcast was brought to you by SivanaSpirit.com. In ancient Indian mythology, and even today, chakras are considered to be the most important energy centers in the body. It's been said that when all 7 energy points are aligned, deep spiritual development occurs. When the chakras come into balance, they bring harmony, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. In fact, sometimes when we feel off, it's really just these energy points that need to be worked on. Celebrate the 7 chakras with a beautiful must-have chakra tank. Printed down the spine with sophisticated metallic ink, the chakras are represented by unique hand-drawn symbols. You can add a pop to your style with elegance, all while reminding yourself of the deeper spiritual truth of our world. Use the exclusive discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. Do you want a $25 gift card from SivanaSpirit.com completely for free? It's super easy. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey with 7 short questions, and then you'll be emailed your gift card to use whenever you're ready. This survey will help us better understand the most important thing in the world, you. Go to SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey today and claim your reward. Again, that's SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey.
Actually, people who are more self-compassion are more willing to take responsibility for their mistakes and more willing to try to repair them. You know why? Because they're able to see things clearly. I'm able to own up to making a mistake, or if I've hurt you in some way. If I know that when I own up to it, I'm going to meet myself with acceptance, I feel really bad. I'm still acceptable, but I feel bad. As opposed to if I know that if I own up to what I did, I'm going to slam myself with criticism. I'm going to use every trick in the book to try to blame you or to avoid responsibility. That's just natural.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Sivana Podcast. As always, we've got a really great guest in store for you today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you to head on over to SivanaSpirit.com/contest to enter each and every week for the chance to win an $100 gift card for the Sivana Spirit store. I'm incredibly excited for today's topic because it's about something I'm constantly trying to practice more, which is self-compassion. We have with us today Dr. Kristin Neff. She's an associate professor at the University of Texas, Austin, and she is a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research. She conducted the first empirical studies on self-compassion over a decade ago, and she's written numerous academic articles on this topic, including her own book, SelfCompassion: The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. She also has her own supported 8-week training program called Mindful Self-Compassion. She teaches worldwide, and she's also featured in the best-selling book and documentary, The Horse Boy, which many of you may have seen or read, which chronicles her family's journey to Mongolia, where they actually trekked on horseback to find healing for her autistic son. Today, Kristin is going to share with us how self-compassion can radically transform your life, and I couldn't be more excited. Kristin, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the first question I wanted to ask you was, what brought you to this work? What got you so passionate about self-compassion to begin with? Because I know in the yoga community, we talk all the time about self-love and gratitude, and all these words kind of get tossed around, but you've really committed yourself to this idea of self-compassion, which I'm going to ask you to define for us later. But how did this journey begin for you?
Well, it was really a personal journey. I mean, the bottom line was my life was a mess. I'd just gotten out of a divorce. It was very messy. I was feeling a lot of shame. I was finishing up my PhD at UC Berkeley and was under a lot of stress. So, basically I thought, well, what can I do to help with my stress? I'd heard meditation was good for stress, so I went to the local meditation group that was just down the street from me. And to my great surprise, the woman leading the group talked about the importance of self-compassion, about, how if you're kind and supportive with yourself, especially in times of struggle, that you can really, help yourself and actually learn to thrive. And I thought, well, this is a time of struggle for me. I'll give it a try. I'll give anything a try. So I started really treating myself like a good friend, watching the language I use with myself, trying to be warm, kind, and I was just amazed at the difference it made almost immediately. So I continued to practice self-compassion, and then when I finally got a job at UT Austin, I realized that no one had studied it before, even though, it had actually been talked about, as you say, in yoga and meditation circles. So I just decided to start to study it, and then kind of history is from there.
So you were already doing a PhD in psychology.
Yes, exactly.
And then you narrowed that down to get really interested in this specifically.
Yes, and my PhD was just more generally in developmental psychology, but once I started getting interested in Buddhism, I started getting interested in self-concept. So I did 2 years of postdoctoral study with one of the country's leading self-concept development researchers, and it was while I was with her that I started seeing all the problems of self-esteem. Psychology was really going through a period of falling out of love with self-esteem as the way to think about, healthy ways of relating to yourself. And that's really what drew the connection for me. I thought self-compassion is such a better way to relate to yourself than self-esteem, because it doesn't require, you judging yourself positively. You just have to be kind to yourself. So that's kind of the whole story of how I came to self-compassion as a construct that I thought could be researched, like self-esteem.
So I'd love for you to define self-compassion for us in your terms, because I know you have very specific things that you say self-compassion is and specific things that you say it is not. So tell us about that.
Right, yeah. And so, my definition of self-compassion is, not everyone shares it, but it's kind of generally used in the field. So basically, I came up with the idea of, well, what is self-compassion? I just read a lot of books on compassion in general, a lot of books from, meditation books, etc. And I realized that, well, there's the most obvious element of self-compassion, which is being kind to yourself, supportive, protective, as opposed to being harshly judgmental. And I think people can kind of agree that, yeah, it means being kind to yourself as opposed to beating yourself up. But I realized that I needed some other elements. For instance, what's the difference between self-compassion and self-pity? Self-pity is not fun. Self-compassion is very different. What is the difference? I realized that with self-compassion, it means that there's a sense of common humanity in terms of how we relate to our own suffering or our own flaws and inadequacies. Instead of being self-focused, poor me, it basically has a broader perspective and says, wait a second, imperfection is part of the shared human experience. No one is perfect and no one leads a perfect life. So self-compassion, the part of it that's compassion, which is kind of to suffer with, the meaning of the word compassion, calm is with, passion is suffer. The idea is you have to frame your experience in light of the shared human experience, so that it's not self-pity. And then I also realized, because I was, doing meditation at the time, that self-compassion required mindfulness. Again, with self-pity, often people are lost in the dramatic storyline, woe is me, this is so terrible. They kind of exaggerate how bad things are. Mindfulness is kind of just a clear seeing of things as they are. So in order to have self-compassion, you need to be mindful of your suffering. In other words, instead of being lost and ruminating on how bad things are, you need to step outside yourself and just kind of say, wow, okay, you failed, you made a mistake, or, you're suffering in some way. It's not the end of the world, but it is happening. How do we relate to this with kindness? So from my point of view, I define self-compassion as being kind as opposed to judgmental, feeling a sense of common humanity as opposed to feeling isolated, poor me, and also being mindful of your imperfections as opposed to what I call over-identifying with what's happening, or you might say being overly dramatic or running away with the storyline of what's happening. So from my point of view, if all three elements aren't there, it may look like self-compassion, but it actually may be more something like self-pity, which actually isn't so helpful.
That's interesting. So you're saying actually all these three things need to be present in order for true self-compassion to occur. And I'm going to go over them again just so our listeners really get them, because I think this is critical. So please correct me as I go. But number one was self-kindness instead of self-judgment. So we're not judging ourselves. Number two is common humanity, not isolation. So, and number three was being mindful instead of being overly dramatic or overly identifying with our thoughts. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about number two, because I think this is really interesting, this common humanity concept, because we're talking about self-compassion, which is clearly like, I'm focused on me, myself, but here we're saying, well, actually, even though it's self-compassion, you want to also be maybe identifying or thinking about everyone who's perhaps struggling with the same thing that you are, tapping into this sense of something greater than yourself. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, and that it's really crucial because, if you think about it, like self-criticism is incredibly self-focused. All you can think about is, poor me, I'm so horrible. Self-compassion, it really just broadens your perspective and says, part of the human experience means making mistakes. That's what we say. It's human to make mistakes, right? But really remembering, okay, this is part of the human experience. Often what happens when people, let's say they fail or make a mistake or something is very difficult in their life, they think something has gone wrong. As if, this isn't the plan I signed up for. Something is wrong, something is abnormal. And that sense of abnormality actually creates a strong sense of isolation, as if I'm the only one in the world who messed up or made a mistake or who's suffering in this way. And that's really a misperception. So with self-compassion, you remember, well, wait a second, this is the sign we all signed up for, the plan we signed up for as humans. This is what it means to be human. Nothing's wrong with what's happening. This is just part and parcel of living a human life. And what that does is it gives a lot more kind of balance and equanimity in the face of failure or, feelings of inadequacy or struggle, which is really one of the reasons why self-compassion is such a positive mind state. If you just go into the poor me, pity thing, feeling isolated, it's actually not very healthy. So that's, from my point of view, it's really crucial to have this sense of common humanity.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have a meditation on YouTube that's really popular about how to get over a breakup. And the main thing I teach in that meditation is to connect with everyone else out there in the world who's going through heartbreak instead of just focusing on your own experience. Because when we make that shift, I really do think something incredibly powerful happens where as you say, it normalizes the experience and gets you connected to this greater sense. I mean, it's like everyone goes through heartbreak, or, most likely all your, brothers and sisters out there in the world, right, have experienced maybe some of the pain or suffering you're going through at a particular type. So, and let's talk now about number three, being mindful instead of getting overly dramatic, because I think that's something people were like, yeah, that makes sense, right? I don't want to be a drama queen in my head. I want to be mindful. But how do we actually do that? Because it sounds like in order to really do that, we need to be very, very aware of our self-talk and what we're thinking. And I think even people who are great yogis and meditators, that's still something we struggle with just in day-to-day life. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So, mindfulness from my point of view really is key to self-compassion. And in fact, if you aren't mindful at all, I don't really think you can be self-compassionate. And in fact, one of the things we know is that people who practice mindfulness, one of the benefits they get is they learn to be more self-compassionate. So I like to think of mindfulness. It's funny, I was teaching something with Brene Brown, and she hates the word mindfulness. And she said, can we just call it courageous presence? Yes, that's great. That's brilliant. Because that's what mindfulness is. It's the courage to be present even with things that are difficult or that we don't want to be present with, right? So we need to be present to acknowledge, wow, I really messed up, or, oh, I'm feeling really inadequate in that way, or, oh, this is so difficult. And we'd rather do anything in our power not to be mindful of it, to try to resist what's happening, to ignore it, to avoid it. But we can't open our hearts to ourselves. We can't support ourselves until we just acknowledge, wow, I'm really struggling. So mindfulness is actually the first step in terms of time sequence of what we need to do to be self-compassionate. We need to start by turning toward the pain, and then we can start to support ourselves and frame it in light of common humanity.
I love what you just said and what you said, Brene Brown said about mindfulness, because on my own podcast as well, I have a whole rant where it's just such a kind of buzzword now, and I don't think anyone really fully gets what it means. And I love when you just say courageous presence, because I'm like, boom, I'm there. And it means like you said, taking that first step of assessing the situation and kind of looking at your pain. And I think so many of us have been programmed from our youngest years and impulses to run away from pain or run away from discomfort.
Yeah, and it's not just that we're programmed, it's this part of our biological nature. I mean, even an amoeba moves away from a toxin in a petri dish, right? So resistance and avoidance is all biological organisms. This is our primary line of defense. So in a way, that's why mindfulness is difficult, because our biology is screaming, fight, flight, or freeze, and we have to say, no, wait a second, I'm going to override that impulse, and I'm going to be present with this perceived danger, because anything that's negative from the body's point of view is perceived as a danger. And that's the real power of mindfulness, is being able to override those impulses, override the resistance, which, it's so funny, like my son, he hates self-compassion because he doesn't want to accept the pain. He's like, no, Mom, I don't want to accept the pain. He's so honest about it. I'm like, okay, well, go for it. See how far it gets you. I mean, I would be totally up for resistance if it worked. The whole problem is it doesn't. It just makes things worse. In a way, we have no choice but to be mindful, because it's like, well, that's reality, right? So we can bang our head against the wall of reality. We can give ourselves a headache, or we can say, okay, I fail. I can't believe I did that. Or, this is what's happening. We really have to accept reality in order for us to move forward. But gosh, we don't want to. And it's so natural not to want to. It's very, like I say, it's all organisms, not just humans.
I love that you're saying this, because I think a lot of listeners, and even myself at times, I think, oh, well, mindfulness is something that should come naturally. And what you're saying here is actually, no, not at all. It takes tremendous bravery, courage, strength, and we're actually programmed to sort of do the opposite. What tips do you give either clients you're working with or in your courses on how to kind of look pain in the face and take that courageous step? Is it through taking a deep breath, or?
Yeah, so there's a lot of techniques. One very helpful technique is just labeling what's happening. I am so angry. I am so afraid. I'm feeling so worthless. It's so funny just because, the human brain is designed basically to run away with problems. That's just the way the structure is. It helped us evolve. But, the human brain, especially more laterally, we've got this really highly developed prefrontal cortex, which allows us to perspective take and look at our experience as if we were looking at it from the outside. So they know, for instance, that when you're angry, just saying, I am so angry right now, actually calms down amygdala reactivity. So that's very easy, just taking an outsider's perspective, labeling what's happening, describing what's happening. You can do things like just find the sensation in your body. So again, you're relating to what's happening from, instead of being lost in it, you're kind of taking a slightly outsider's perspective. Like, oh, that's gripping in my stomach, or tightness, and that can help you stay present with it. Breathing, there's lots of well-developed mindfulness techniques. Luckily, like I say, in the program I developed with my colleague Chris Germer, Mindful Self-Compassion, we ride on the coattails of all these very well-established techniques for developing mindfulness, and then we add in the self-compassion on top. So luckily, it's a pretty well-developed field, and the skills are, like I say, they're unnatural. They really are unnatural. But on the other hand, they aren't rocket science, right? It's just being aware of what's happening as it's happening. It's actually not that difficult. It's just not. We just have to put an intentional effort in.
So you hinted for us at this chronology of things that sort of have to happen in a certain order in order for self-compassion to happen. So this first step, whether we're calling it mindfulness or courageous presence, which I personally like way more, is sort of step number one. Do you want to walk us through the next few steps in this process?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of the kindness or the common humanity, that one doesn't seem, from my experience, I've taught thousands and thousands of people, doesn't seem to necessarily have to have a particular order. It's kind of what's most available to you. But I think oftentimes, for instance, I teach people one very, very easy way to access self-compassion is to think, well, what would I say to a friend who had this exact same situation happen? Because we have a lot of experience being kind and supportive to friends. So it can be easy for people to think, well, what would I say to a friend? And then the kindness comes. And again, usually with our friends, we kind of instinctively see, hey, this happens to everyone. It's only human. Don't beat yourself up. So, I think all that kind of flows naturally the second we start treating ourselves the way we treat our friends. So again, that's the funny thing. It's not instinctual, but it's also not rocket science, because we have a whole lifetime knowing how to be warm, kind, and supportive to the people we care about. The trick is just to start doing this, practicing the skill with ourselves.
I'm really curious because we've talked a little bit about what's instinctual, and I'm curious for your perspective. Do you think that so many people struggle with self-compassion because it is something that's programmed, like you're saying, or is it deeper than that? Like if you study, I don't know if you've studied other animals, but do they have an easier time? Because I feel like, yes, it's part sort of like you're saying, like we're not programmed or wired to necessarily think this way. But I have this hunch that there's something deeper going on. I don't know if it's from our childhood or society at large, where, as you said, we're fantastic at being compassionate friends, but somehow we lack that skill set when it comes to ourselves.
I think it's a complex interaction of factors, right? So animals aren't sitting around criticizing themselves because animals don't have a sense of self. So one of the big distinguishing factors between humans and other animals is this sense of self. And in fact, we know human beings have what's called the default mode network that evolved, thousands of years ago. And the default mode means like the resting state of our brain. The second we have a moment's downtime, we know that the brain does three things. It, first of all, creates a sense of self. Only humans do that. It projects that sense of self into the past or the future. Again, this time perspective only humans have, and it looks for problems. So all beings look for problems, but human beings are one of the reasons we're so successful is we're able to do that in our heads. What happened yesterday? What did I learn from that? What might that say about where the danger is going to lurk tomorrow? So that ability to abstract through time and to create a sense of self that travels through time, that's a very human capacity, but it comes with a big cost, which is basically we start evaluating that sense of self. Is it good enough? And often the answer is no. Or we start worrying terribly about that sense of self, creating a lot of unnecessary suffering. So I think, again, partly it's biological, but I think especially with self-compassion, there are huge cultural blocks against it. Right? You aren't raised thinking compassion's a bad thing. Everyone, there's a little disagreement, but most people think compassion's a pretty good thing. But self-compassion, everywhere I speak, the same cultural misgivings come up about self-compassion. And it's funny, this happens around the world, so that they seem to be ubiquitous. One is it's self-pity, it's selfish, it's weak, it's self-indulgent, it's going to undermine your motivation, and it will cause you to blow off responsibility. So those basic 6 same misconceptions come up every single place I speak, no matter the culture. So I don't know why that is, if that's cultural, if maybe, I don't know, it's genetically related, I can't say for sure, but certainly we aren't raised with the idea that self-compassion is a good thing. We're raised with the idea that it's not a good thing, and it's kind of dangerous and scary, and we shouldn't do it. So we're really fighting an uphill battle with learning to be more self-compassionate.
I want to ask you about achievement, and if you think that has something to do with maybe what's at play here, clearly not just in America, but the whole world, according to your experience, because I think...
there are differences, but the same theme is there to greater or lesser degree, yeah.
Right. So, and maybe this can tie into us talking about self-esteem as well, which I know is not the same thing, but I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think a lot of us, our sense of self-worth or our self-esteem comes from solving those problems that our mind is constantly thinking about, or achieving things professionally, personally, or monetarily. And so we don't have this innate sense of self-love, self-worth, and that maybe makes this practice of self-compassion more challenging.
Yeah, so in terms of how it's related to achievement motivation, right? So most people think they kind of use self-esteem as the carrot and self-criticism as the stick. In other words, if I achieve my goal, I'm going to get self-esteem, and if I don't achieve my goal, I'm going to beat myself up with the stick. And remember, this is the way we used to parent our children, right? We used to make our love very conditional and basically spare the rod, spoil the child. If our child messes up, the way to get them to behave is through harsh, even corporal punishment. So this, it's only recently that we realize that actually unconditional love and support is a much better way to motivate our children than this, constant fear of being hit physically. But for some reason we haven't gotten that message yet with ourselves. I think it's starting to change. So, the thing about motivating yourself with fear of basically loss of self-esteem, with fear of self-judgment, is it does kind of work, right? We wouldn't do it if it didn't work. It is a motivating force. The problem is that it has a lot of unintended consequences. For instance, one, it creates performance anxiety, right? So one of the biggest blocks to doing our best is fear of failure. Because we know if we fail, we're going to hate ourselves, right? Or beat ourselves up, judge ourselves. So it creates a lot of anxiety, which actually ends up undermining our performance. Also, the type of criticism we use from this place of harsh judgment is often kind of very black and white. It's not nuanced, and it tends to make us so upset we can't even take it in. Just think about, that coach you had maybe in high school. You had the one coach who was really critical and said, "You're crap and you'll never do good at this, and this is all the things you're doing wrong." And yeah, it kind of made you work harder, but it also probably threw you off step, right? Because you lost confidence in yourself and you couldn't really hear anything other than "I'm horrible." Whereas maybe you had one of those coaches who's like, "Hey, I believe in you. Here's, uses constructive criticism. Here's what you could do better. It's not that you are bad, but it'd be better if you change this action or behavior or something like that." And the best coaches are the ones who the bottom line is they're going to support you anyway. You aren't going to lose their love or affection if you don't succeed. Same with parents, right? We know if the bottom line is I can try, I can fail, and even if I fail, it will still be okay, then that actually is what allows us to take much bigger risk. So there's tons of research now that shows that self-compassion is a much more effective motivator than self-criticism. It's really, I think from my point of view, I'm satisfied. I don't think any more research needs to be done, but there's lots of studies showing this.
I'm super fascinated by what you said, in that most of us are living in this carrot and stick place, right? Where if we do good, we feel good about ourselves, our self-esteem is okay. And if we don't, we're beating ourselves up. And there's not this underlying, sort of like the coach, it sounds like we have to be our own coach.
Exactly. That's what we need to do. We need to learn to motivate ourselves with the same stance as an unconditionally caring, supportive coach. And it doesn't mean you don't say you're doing anything wrong and, "Oh, that's fine." That's indulgence, right? A coach, you said, "Oh, that's right, that basketball performance was wonderful." And if it wasn't, well, that's not kind. It's not going to help the basketball player grow and improve. So we need to see ourselves clearly and point out ways our behavior is not so good and the ways it can be improved. But it can be done in a way that's kind and supportive as opposed to hateful and damning, And it's much more easily received and integrated when it's done in this supportive context.
And what advice do you have for your clients and students and our listeners on how to achieve this? Because I think many of us didn't have this model in perhaps our family household growing up. And it just seems like a completely unfamiliar concept because we're so used to doing it the old way where, if we do good, we feel good about ourselves. And if we don't, we don't. It seems like a completely new role that you're asking us to take on for ourselves. How do we start?
Well, it is, but I don't think it's quite as radically new as you might think. Most people have experience with maybe a really close friend or a child or someone who they've motivated with kindness. First of all, it's okay to make mistakes. I'm here for you anyway, but here's where you could do better. Usually I think there may be some people for whom they've never experienced that anywhere in their life, but I think it's actually a bit unusual. But I think that's the way to start, is to instead of thinking about yourself, to think about, what if I had a friend I really cared about, or my child who I really care about? what's going to be the best way to motivate them so that they know the bottom line is they're okay, but I can point out how they need to correct their behavior in a way that they can hear that's constructive as opposed to destructive. And then also tone of voice. So much is conveyed through tone. And most of us have some experience using a warm tone of voice to someone we care about. We just don't have experience with ourselves, but we actually get people to listen to the tone of voice you just used with yourself. Was that warm and supportive or not? And usually people can tell, and they can reframe their internal dialogue so that it is more warm and supportive.
That is a great tip.
Well, I've been surprised, actually, I must admit, by how easy it is to teach people self-compassion. I thought it'd be harder. You can even just, in experimental studies, you can just have people write a paragraph of, first of all, mindfulness, be aware of what's happening, or how are you struggling, be kind to yourself in this moment, say something to yourself like you would say to a good friend, and remember, write something about how this is part of the shared human experience. Really easy, simple stuff, no training even involved, and people get really good outcomes from that. It can radically change your behavior just by following those 3 steps. So like I say, luckily that's the good news. It's not as hard as you might think to get people to use these new skills.
I really love the tip about the tone of voice, because I think it can be challenging to catch every single thought we're saying to ourselves, because there's so many happening. But I do know that even for myself, there is this harsh, very, very mean voice that I don't use with anyone in my life but myself, right? And trying to change the tone of that voice is something that I think is really just such a great tip and so interesting.
Yeah, and what can also help, and it also helps change the tone of the voice, is some sort of physical gesture of warmth and support. So putting your hand on your heart or on your stomach or holding your own hand or something. Because we are mammals, right? And we know that 2 universal triggers of the compassion response is tone of voice and a physical gesture of warmth. So if you do something like put your hand on your heart or stomach, or like I say, anything that works for you, people are different in terms of what works, but it actually changes the physiology, and we don't have all the dots connected, but there's some indication that what's happening is you start releasing oxytocin and opiates. You activate the parasympathetic nervous system when you use physical touch on yourself, and that helps you actually respond in this kinder way.
That's such a great tip. And I think, as someone who comes from a yoga background and strong physical practice, it makes so much sense, and that's something very easy to practice.
And it's not just humans. Think about like a puppy or a kitten. They also have the same triggers. Warmth, they like to cuddle, and they think of those kind of soft mewing noises they make. This is something that's part of our mammalian heritage that we can actually tap into to help ourselves.
I love that. And yeah, I wanted to go back to this coming again from the yoga world, which I know many of our listeners are as well, is this idea of self-love that gets thrown around, and doing self-love meditation, and you should have, focus on self-love. And I think when we talk about self-love, and I want to hear you tell us about this, but all of a sudden it seems, it can start to seem, I think, for some people a little self-indulgent. And it's like, if I just love myself like crazy, it's like, well, why do anything? Like, why get up out of bed? Why record this podcast? Why? But your analogy of talking about the coach, that coach who is super supportive but still challenging you, I think has really been a light bulb moment. I hope for a lot of our listeners and for me as well. But do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I tend to avoid the term self-love. Love, of course, is part of it. I think that's where the kindness comes from. But the problem with self-love is it can also be confused with narcissism, right? And so that's when you think you're better than other people, and you just think you're wonderful, and you don't see any of your flaws, and you kind of sugarcoat the reality of your behavior. And that's actually not helpful to anyone. If you've ever dated a narcissist, you know the problems associated with that, right? So that's why, again, there's nothing wrong with the term, but it can be confusing. The thing about self-compassion is compassion built into the word is suffering, right? That's what it means, to suffer with. And so when we talk about self-compassion, it automatically talks about the fact that, and by the way, there are analogies that maybe apply not to suffering, but self-compassion in particular is always aimed at pain and suffering. unfortunately, but that's the truth. But what that means is that you're aimed at places where you don't feel so good about yourself, where you feel inadequate, where you failed, where you've made a mistake, where you're struggling in some way. And then so the compassion, again, that's partly the mindfulness. The mindfulness always has to validate and acknowledge, I am struggling. This is hard. That was a really mean thing I said. Whatever it is that's coming up for you that's causing this reaction, you've got to see clearly kind of where the pain is, right? And that's what kind of keeps it from being this sugarcoating or this narcissism, like everything I do is okay. Well, actually, everything I do is not okay. And we need to be able to see that in order to really be kind to ourselves in terms of helping us grow and change for the better.
Close your eyes. Imagine yourself transported to an oceanfront tropical paradise where you're sipping on kombucha, watching the sunset as the waves roll in. You're spending your days practicing yoga in the sand and taking your first surf lesson. I'm so excited to announce that this could be your reality. We've partnered with our friends at Yogascapes to give away 2 tickets to one of their beautiful Costa Rican yoga retreats. Not only that, but we've also partnered with 5 more of our favorite brands to chip in for a total prize package worth over $5,000. Head over to savanaspirit.com/Costa Rica to learn more. And if someone said to you, oh, well, if I practice this, I'll never get anything done. It just means I'm letting myself off the hook all the time. You would tell them...
Well, first of all, I'd show them the research to show that's not true. That actually people who are more self-compassion are more willing to take responsibility for their mistakes and more willing to try to repair them. Why? Because they're able to see things clearly. I'm able to own up to making a mistake or, if I've hurt you in some way. If I know that when I own up to it, I'm going to meet myself with acceptance, I feel really bad. I'm still acceptable, but I feel bad. As opposed to if I know that if I own up to what I did, I'm going to slam myself with criticism. I'm going to use every trick in the book to try to blame you or to avoid responsibility. That's just natural, right? So again, being kind and supportive to yourself means wanting what's best for yourself, wanting what's healthiest for yourself, and avoiding responsibility is not good or healthy for you. It's just going to lead to lots of problems in your life.
And what I feel like I heard you say when you were talking about that coach analogy is that actually by being the kinder coach, that you actually can have better results, achieve more because you're not nervous of slipping up or you don't have this voice that's yelling at you in your head. So this could actually be framed as a performance enhancer for many people.
It is a performance enhancer, and like for me, I'm you might say I'm a self-compassion expert, and I mess up all the time. I make mistakes. I hurt people's feelings. I don't know if I've probably grown since I started researching this, but I still make mistakes all the time. But I'm so good at owning it and apologizing and repair. It's like perfection is an unattainable ideal, but you actually can attain the ideal of owning it, apologizing, and trying to repair it. And that comes so easily to me because I have no expectation that I should be perfect, right? So it's not even a problem if I mess up. It's like, oh gosh, yes, I'm so sorry. There's no resistance to acknowledging when I've made a mistake, which is one of the reasons it really helps you take responsibility.
Would you say then that people who are practicing this are actually more confident?
Yes, actually we've got research to support that. It does increase confidence. Well, it makes sense, right? Because one of the things with self-compassion, if you kind of see yourself clearly, then, it's not that I am a bad person or I'm incapable because I failed that exam. It's okay, in this particular situation, it's much more situation-based. In this situation, I failed the math exam, but it doesn't mean I'm stupid, right? So it can be more contextually specific. It can be more exact. It doesn't generalize the global evaluations of good versus bad the way self-esteem tends to. So if people are more self-confident, because basically it means you got your own back, and when you have your own back, it's going to give you more confidence to try your best and succeed.
It also seems like you're maybe just more firmly grounded in reality, and as you keep saying, seeing things clearly instead of making yourself out to be like this devil, terrible person if you do something wrong, and oh my gosh, you're amazing if you do something right. You actually have this much clearer perspective of yourself when you look in the mirror.
Much more nuance, which is true, and that actually is a really good for helping growth and change, when you can see clearly where you're getting it right and where you're getting it wrong, and that it's okay to get things wrong. It's not the end of the world, so you can see it clearly and you can work more specifically on changing those behaviors that aren't so helpful. It just makes a lot of sense from my point of view anyway.
So for people who are listening at home and really feeling connected with this concept and saying, okay, I embrace this, what's the best place for them to start?
Yeah, well, so one really easy place to start is my website, selfcompassion.org. I've really tried to make it, an easy, free resource for people. So you can listen to little MP3s of practices I lead. You can take the self-compassion test to see how self-compassionate you are. You can read tons of research articles. You can listen to download meditations. So it might be a really good place to start. And then the other place is the Center for MSC.org, which is the nonprofit foundation for, the program we've developed, Mindful Self-Compassion. And you might even be able to find someone in your local area teaching the course if you wanted to go further.
Wonderful. And is there any last sort of tidbits or personal stories that you want to share with us? I know you're a mom, and I'm sure you're practicing a lot of this in your day-to-day life with yourself, but it sounds like it's something you're also actively trying to teach your son. And I'm sure some of the parents listening might be curious about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been really interested in lately is the role of self-compassion for caregivers, right? I'm actually doing a research study looking at nurses and doctors to see if it helps burnout. And one of the reasons that self-compassion, self-care is so important for people who care for others is because basically, we know that burnout's a big problem for whether it's parents, whether or not it's a special needs kid. You can burn out from being a parent, or whether you're a teacher or a professional caregiver, you can burn out because it's like you're just giving and not recharging your own batteries. Now, the people often say, well, you should practice self-care, do yoga, eat well, take a rest, see your friends. The whole problem with that, though, is that it all happens off the job. I mean, there's no downside. I think the more self-care, the better. But it all happens off the job. So we need a practice that we can do in the moment of suffering, basically, related to caregiving. So when your kid's throwing a tantrum in the store, or, you're caring for your elderly parent who has Alzheimer's, and you're just, you're dying inside because you see your parent change so much, or whatever it is, you need to practice self-compassion in the moment. And that's what I did with my son, who's autistic. He would throw these horrible tantrums in public, and I would actually put most of my energy in the moment on, telling myself, this is so hard for you right now, darling, I'm here for you, it's going to be okay, I would just say any supportive thing I could to myself in the moment. And so what that does is it actually gives you the immediate resources, not like off the job, but it's like when the plane's going down, and you see that they have that cartoon, put your own oxygen mask on first. Well, you don't wait till the plane has already crashed to put your oxygen mask on. You need to do it when the plane is going down. In other words, in the difficult caregiving moment, put your mask on and the self-compassion, be kind, supportive to yourself. You kind of rest in you might say the love, holding the pain of the situation. And the really amazing thing about this is we know that human beings naturally read each other's emotions. We have this ability for empathetic resonance. So you pick up on the emotions of the person you're caring for. So if they're in pain, you're actually feeling some of that pain empathetically. But they pick up on your emotions as well. So if you're a parent or a caregiver and you're giving yourself compassion for the pain of caregiving, the person you're caring for is actually picking up on your compassionate state of mind. So not only does it help them by you having more resources to give, it actually helps them directly. Like my son, I saw this all the time. He would actually calm down the moment I started giving myself compassion because he was feeding off my kind of internal balance as opposed to my internal frustration. So I suppose any parents or caregivers or, anyone who's caring for maybe a friend who's talking about a relationship breakup, the more you can give yourself compassion for the pain of, having to be there for someone else, the more you actually help them both directly and indirectly. It's really quite amazing.
That really is amazing, because I think so many of us, when we're in that caregiver situation, we are just thinking that all of our energy and thought should be output towards helping them. And what you're saying is actually by using those difficult situations and moments as an opportunity to practice self-compassion ourselves. It's like we're leading by example and helping ourselves and then helping them.
Exactly, yes. And it also puts you in the more balanced state of mind so you can listen more and take more in and all that as well.
I think that's such a great tip. Kristin, thank you so much for speaking with us. I know I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. I know you mentioned a few resources earlier, but what's the best URL or place for people to go to just stay connected or learn more about you?
SelfCompassion.org. If you just Google self-compassion, it comes up. And then from my website, you can find a link to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion website as well. So just Google self-compassion, you'll find me. That's a great place to start, I think. Easy.
Wonderful. Kristin, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope our paths cross soon. Namaste. Hi everyone, Brett here with an announcement. We are starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Sivana Spirit. If you'd like to enter the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savanaspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, would really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes and left us a review. Leave us some comments. We love your feedback, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might also enjoy it. I also wanted to invite you to go check out Sivana East, which is the name of our blog, and also the name of our Facebook group, where you can ask questions, see who's coming on the show, and share your ideas. We will post the most recent episodes there, as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and topics on the shows. Again, thank you so much for listening, and from my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana Podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to savanaspirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at sivanaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana Podcast.